All right, so over the past few days, we studied a lot about explorers and everything that they found in the Americas, which is pretty cool. Like they came and they found this new land, and we learned about the kind of cool parts, like them finding gold. But we also learned about some not so smart things that they believed in, like the Fountain of Youth, Ponce de Leon. What were you thinking? And getting killed by poisonous arrows. And we need to also recognize the fact that explorers weren't necessarily good people. Okay, so let's talk about the harsh realities of what happened to the Native Americans that were already living on this land. Okay, so for years, people, even now, are glorifying explorers like they're amazing people who found amazing things, and they were glorified. There's statues of them, but we need to also kind of talk about the fact that they dealt horrifically with Native Americans, and they drove them or killed them out of their land. All right, this is a statue of Columbus, and even in America, we had a lot of statues of Columbus, and even still, some people in America think that Columbus is great and that he discovered America, all of these things, which isn't even really true. He didn't even know he was in America, for one, right? But not only did him as an Italian explorer, not only did he deal horrifically with the Native Americans, spreading disease, making them work as slaves, also the Spanish explorers like Coronado, Cortez, they all dealt horribly with the Native Americans, as did the French. Okay, so in America, actually, we have a day called Columbus Day, and that's on October 12th, and people still celebrate it, right? We actually, a lot of people who recognize the fact that Columbus wasn't a great person for killing and using and abusing so many Native Americans, they've actually replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous People Day, which is, in other words, Native American People Day, to recognize the Native Americans who sacrificed themselves and their lives for these colonizers. Okay, so let's first talk about the Spanish explorers. So we studied a few Spanish explorers. We studied Cortez, Pizarro, Coronado, and Ponce de Leon. And with the land that the Spanish conquerors took over, Catholic missionaries from Spain came to the Americas. Mexico, for one, was a big place where they would spread the Catholic faith. And actually, the Native Americans did not believe in the Christian God. They had their own faith. They believed actually that God was within nature and that natural elements were kind of spirits in the world. And so these Catholic missionaries would come to spread their faith. Missionaries are people who come from somewhere else into another land to share their religion. Okay, and they're trying to convert Native Americans, meaning change the religion of these Native Americans. And these missionaries created something known as a mission. Okay, so missions living in missionaries, fitting, or missionaries living in missions, fitting, right? And they would house these Native Americans. Okay, they would teach them how to grow food. They grew their own food and they produced what they needed here. And so everything seems fine and dandy. Just hold off on that thought for a second. Along with the missionaries, a lot of people from Spain came to North and Central America to live and establish towns. We talked about settlers before, and Spain also brought in settlers to live and create communities in the Americas. One such man was named Juan de Oñate, and he was in Mexico, but he wanted to actually move up to New Mexico and create a land or a settlement there. And he was very rich. He had already made a fortune off of silver, but he wanted more. He wanted to discover more. And so in 1598, Oñate brought 400 settlers and 7,000 animals from Mexico to New Mexico to start their own civilization. Now, things seem like they are all fine and good, but not. So, the settlers who went into New Mexico from Mexico, they also included some missionaries to go with them. And obviously, in New Mexico, there were already Native Americans who were settled there. And they were actually the Pueblo people, the people who lived in those adobe apartments, which were really incredible, right? But these Spanish settlers had different plans. So when they went there and they landed there, the Native Americans actually treated them very kindly. They welcomed them in. They treated them very, very openly. And the Spanish settlers repaid them with horrible cruelty. So essentially, it's kind of like as though somebody came into your home, into your personal home that you own, and make you their slave, right? These people are foreigners. They're not from that land. The Native Americans have been living there for years and years and years and years. And these people come in and then they use force and strength to make the Native Americans their slaves. What? Right? Not only this, but these missionaries who came from Spain were not kind missionaries serving the Lord with love, right? When we think of missionaries, we think of people who are just spreading the word of God in a way that is loving, in a way that shows compassion. And that's what God had intended for missionaries. But these missionaries were a little bit different. They basically used force and power and control to make these Native Americans Catholic. Okay, so these people were made as slaves, but also the Catholic priests would use a whip to whip the Pueblo religious leaders. Remember, the Pueblo Native Americans did not believe in the Christian God. They believed in nature, right? And so they had all these traditional ceremonies for religion, and the Catholic priests basically whipped them and abused them to stop. I don't think that that's what God meant when he said to go make disciples, right? He didn't mean whip them until they became disciples. He said to spread the word in love, but instead these people used abusive techniques. All right, but the Native Americans didn't just sit with this, right? This led to a revolt. And a revolt is an action against the government or law to drive the Spanish settlers out. So basically, they fought back and they pushed out the settlers. But in 12 years, those settlers would come back. So that's Spain. And the arrival of the Spanish greatly impacted the Native Americans in good ways, like the Spanish settlers helped the Native Americans with how to grow food in the dry, hot soil, right? But the negative effects were much, much worse than the positive, okay? And first of all, they brought 3 different kinds of diseases: smallpox, measles, and the influenza that wiped out entire villages of Pueblo tribes. And also the abuse, the slavery, that was also very, very traumatizing, and it destroyed the Native American tribes, right? So before Coronado's expedition, there were 100 thriving Pueblo villages. Pueblo villages meaning Pueblos like this, right? They were doing very, very well. After the Spanish explorers, after the Spanish colonizers, there were only 19 out of the 100 tribes left. Everyone else had died. So now let's talk about the French, okay? The French are in Canada, so North America and the northeast side of North America. And the French were more concerned about their precious beavers. They didn't really care about land that much. The Spanish wanted to like basically kick out the Native Americans and start their own settlements, but the French weren't really interested in that as much. They basically just wanted to find beavers to make fur, to use their fur to make hats and to sell, right? So instead of conquering the Native Americans or pushing them out or killing them, they actually made them into business partners. Okay, so Champlain made friends with the nearby Native Americans. They were a group called the Hurons. Okay, and French fur trappers, French beaver hunters, basically, the Coeur de Bois, even married the woman of the Huron Native American group and learned the language of the Huron Native American group and learned how to survive with them. So they kind of became a society together. Okay. However, the Huron tribe was also very affected by the diseases that came and basically wiped out entire groups. So the diseases were one of the main killers of Native Americans when Europeans started to come. And Champlain even helped Huron attack the Iroquois tribe. The Iroquois were a different Native American group, and actually Native Americans sometimes had fights with other Native American tribes. So the Hurons had an enemy called the Iroquois. Okay? And here's what Champlain said about how he helped the Huron fight against the Iroquois Native Americans. So he said, I marched some 20 paces, so 20 steps, in advance of the rest, so in front of the rest of the group, until I was within 30 paces of the enemy. So he saw the Iroquois as the enemy. When I saw them making a move to fire at us, right, probably with bow and arrow, I rested my musket or gun against my cheek and aimed it directly at one of the three chiefs. Chiefs are the leader of the group. They're very important. With that same shot, two fell to the ground, and one of their men was so wounded that he died sometime after. When our side saw this shot, they began to raise loud cries that one could not have heard it thunder. Okay, so basically they used a gun, or Champlain used a gun to kill the Iroquois leader for the sake of the Huron Native American tribe. And even though the Huron Native American tribe were cheering because the Iroquois were their enemies, he still used a weapon that the Native Americans had never even seen before. The Iroquois tribe had never laid eyes on a gun ever in their lives until this fight. And Champlain kind of used it as an unfair advantage to kill the leader of their group. From that day forward, the Iroquois Native Americans had never remained bitter at the French. Okay, so from that day forward, they remained bitter enemies of the French. And so even the French, even though they did do business with the Native American of the Huron group, they also affected other Native American groups negatively, right? Introducing weapons against them, like the gun. And they also introduced a lot of diseases to kill a lot of Native Americans. All right, so make sure that you fill out the form that goes along with this video. Bye.